The bootlace came apart easily once Priya found the weak spot in the weave. She pulled the threads free one by one, her fingers working without thought while the transport shuttle shook through another patch of turbulence. Around her, 40 cadets from 12 different species talked loudly about their home worlds and their training scores and the medals they planned to earn. Priya said nothing. She braided the threads into a thin cord and wrapped it around her wrist point 2 seats ahead. A tall, scaled alien turned to look at her. His name was Dren, a variety from a desert world where temperatures could melt steel during the day. His yellow eyes studied her for a long moment before he leaned toward his companion. "That is the human," he said, not bothering to lower his voice. "Look at her. No clothes, no armor, no venom glands. Her species cannot even see heat signatures." His companion was Scylla, a Mithrani with 4 arms and compound eyes that reflected the shuttle's lights like broken mirrors. She tilted her head at an angle that suggested amusement. "I reviewed their biological data," Scylla said. "Humans require sleep for 8 hours every day. They cannot regulate their body temperature without external tools. Their bones break under minimal pressure. Statistically, they are among the weakest species in the Allied forces." Dren made a sound like rocks grinding together. Laughter. "And yet they send one to the survival assessment. The instructors must need entertainment." Priya finished her cord and started on the other bootlace. She did not look up. The shuttle dropped through the clouds of Verdaxis 3, a jungle moon that the Allied military academy used for its harshest training exercises. Through the small window beside her, Priya could see greens stretching to every horizon. The jungle canopy looked solid enough to walk on. Instructor Gorvin stood at the front of the shuttle. He was a Bracther, nearly 3 meters tall, with arms thick as tree trunks and a face that looked like it had been carved from gray stone by someone who had never seen a smile. "Listen well," he said. "You will not hear this twice." The shuttle went quiet. 72 hours. Solo survival assessment. You will be dropped at random coordinates across the training zone. Your extraction point is 40 kilometers to the north. You will have no technology, no communication devices, no weapons except a standard knife. He held up a small blade that looked like a toy in his massive hand. You will have 1 canteen. Nothing else. A Krellian cadet raised a tentacle. "What about emergency beacons? Each of you will carry 1 beacon. Press it, and a shuttle will collect you within the hour. But press it and you fail. There are no second chances." Gorvin's stone eyes swept across the cadets. "The jungle has predators that can kill most of you in seconds. It has plants that will stop your heart. It has weather that has destroyed survey teams with full equipment. Respect it or die." The shuttle began dropping cadets one by one. Each departure was the same. The cadet would stand, collect their knife and canteen and beacon, and jump through the side door into the green below. Most of them looked confident. Some looked terrified. None of them looked at Priya. When her turn came, she stood without hurry. She took the knife and tested its edge against her thumb. Sharp enough. She hooked the canteen to her belt and tucked the beacon into her pocket. "Human," Gorvin said. She looked at him. "Your species has never completed this assessment." Priya nodded once and jumped. The fall lasted 3 seconds. She crashed through layers of leaves and vines and grabbed a thick branch to slow herself. Her shoulder screamed in protest, but held. She dropped the final few meters and landed in soft mud at the bottom of a ravine. For a long moment, she simply stood there. Listening, the jungle was loud. Insects buzzed in frequencies that made her teeth ache. Birds screamed warnings from the canopy. Water rushed somewhere nearby. And beneath all of it, the deep quiet of large things waiting. Priya looked up. The twin suns of this system were visible through a gap in the canopy, positioned about 30 degrees from vertical. She had roughly 6 hours of daylight left. She knelt and picked up a handful of soil. Dark, rich, wet but not waterlogged. She smelled it. Organic decay. Nothing chemical or sulfuric. Good. The water sound came from her left. She walked toward it slowly, stopping every few steps to watch and listen. The ravine opened onto a small river, clear and fast-moving. She did not drink from it yet. Instead, she found a spot where the bank was soft clay and looked for tracks. Many animals came here to drink. Some tracks were small, rodent-like. Others were larger, with deep claw marks. One set of prints was nearly as long as her forearm. She memorized the shapes and moved upstream, away from the predator trails. By the time the suns touched the horizon, Priya had found a spot where massive tree roots created a natural shelter. She spent the remaining light gathering broad leaves to cover the gaps and soft moss to lie on. She did not think about Dren or Scylla or their laughter. She did not think about the 40 kilometers ahead. She thought only about the next hour, the next task, the next breath. Her grandfather had taught her that. Long ago, in a different jungle, on a world these aliens had never heard of, the forest does not care about your plans, he had told her. It only cares about what you do right now. Priya finished her shelter as darkness fell. She sat in the opening and watched the jungle come alive with sounds she did not recognize. 72 hours. 40 kilometers. One knife. She closed her eyes and began a plan. Cold came to Verdaxis 3 like a thief. 1 hour the air was thick and warm. The next hour Priya could see her breath rising in pale clouds. She had expected this. Desert moons with heavy jungle cover often had wild temperature swings. The plants held heat during the day and released it after sunset. By midnight, the temperature would drop close to freezing. Priya pulled her uniform tighter and began gathering dry material from beneath the root shelter. Dead leaves, thin twigs, bark that crumbled when she pressed it. She made a small pile and set it aside. Then she found 2 pieces of wood, one flat and one straight, and began the slow work of making fire. The technique was simple. Press the straight stick against the flat piece. Spin it between your palms as fast as possible. Friction creates heat. Heat creates ember. Ember creates fire. Simple to explain. Difficult to do. 40 minutes passed. Her palms burned. The wood grew warm but would not catch. Priya stopped, breathed slowly, and started again. 12 kilometers to the east. Dren was dying. He did not know it yet. His Varadi body was designed for heat. His blood ran cold, and his muscles needed warmth to function. On his homeworld, he would simply dig into the hot sand and wait for sunrise. Here there was no hot sand. There was only wet soil and cold air and the growing heaviness in his limbs that told him something was very wrong. That he tried to keep moving. Walking generated heat, but each step was slower than the last. His yellow eyes dimmed as his body began to shut down. The emergency beacon sat heavy in his pocket. He told himself he would not use it. He told himself he was strong. 20 kilometers to the south, Scylla faced a different problem. Her compound eyes were perfect for detecting movement. On her home world, this made her an excellent hunter. Nothing could approach without her knowing. But the jungle moved constantly. Leaves shook in wind she could not feel. Insects flew in spiraling patterns. Small creatures darted between shadows. Her eyes saw everything, and her brain could not process any of it. She climbed a tall tree and wedged herself between branches, trying to focus on just one direction. It did not help. The movement was everywhere. She felt like she was drowning in information. She had been trained to trust data, to analyze and calculate and reach logical conclusions. But the jungle offered too much data and not enough patterns. Her analytical mind spun in circles and found no answers. Back at the root shelter, Priya finally saw smoke, a tiny curl of gray rising from the friction point. She did not stop. She pressed harder, spun faster, ignored the pain in her hands. The smoke grew thicker, and ember appeared, small and orange and fragile. Priya transferred it to her pile of dry material with hands that did not shake. She blew gently. Once, twice. The ember brightened, caught, spread, fire. She fed it carefully, adding larger pieces only when the smaller ones burned strong. Within 10 minutes, she had a flame the size of her fist, burning in a small pit she had dug into the shelter floor. The smoke rose and dispersed through the root gaps above. No one would see it from outside. The heat stayed low and filled the shelter with warmth that pushed back the cold. Priya held her hands over the flame and thought about her grandfather. He had been born in a small village in the mountains. No electricity, no running water. He had learned to make fire when he was 5 years old because fire meant survival. When he was old and she was young, he had taught her everything he knew. Technology fails, he had told her. Machines break. Power runs out. But this, he had touched his head, this never runs out. This is what makes humans strong. She had not understood then. She understood now at T3 in the morning. Dren pressed his emergency beacon. The shuttle found him curled beneath a fallen log, his scales pale gray and his eyes barely open. His body temperature had dropped to dangerous levels. The medical team worked quickly, wrapping him in thermal blankets and injecting stimulants into his bloodstream. He would live. But he had failed. As they loaded him onto the shuttle, he looked out the window at the dark jungle below. Somewhere in that darkness, the human was still out there. The small one with no claws and no armor and no venom. He thought about what he had said on the transport. He thought about his laughter. The shuttle door closed and carried him away. Priya slept in short intervals, waking every hour to feed the fire and listen to the jungle. Once she heard something large moving through the undergrowth nearby. Heavy footsteps, deep breathing, the crack of branches breaking under significant weight. She went completely still, controlled her breathing, made herself small and silent. The predator passed within 20 meters of her shelter. She saw its shadow through the gaps in the roots. Massive, four-legged, covered in something that reflected moonlight like wet leather. It stopped. Sniffed the air. Priya did not move, did not blink, did not breathe. Long seconds passed. The predator made a low sound in its throat and moved on, following a scent trail that led away from her position. She waited another 10 minutes before allowing herself to exhale. Dawn came slowly. Gray light filtered through the canopy. The cold began to fade. Priya let her fire die to embers and covered them with ash. She ate a handful of tubers she had gathered the day before, raw but safe. She refilled her canteen from the river using a cloth torn from her sleeve as a filter. Day 2 had begun 40 kilometers still ahead. But she was alive. She was warm. She was moving. That was enough. 3 snares. Priya had set them the night before using the cord from her bootlaces and thin branches bent into spring tension. Simple traps. The kind her grandfather had shown her in the forest near their village. Point 2 were empty. The third held a small creature that looked like a rat crossed with a lizard. Dead. The snare had done its job quickly. Priya worked fast. She used her knife to clean the animal, saving the meat and setting aside the organs she could not identify. The fur and bones went into a small pile. Nothing wasted. On Earth, her ancestors had survived ice ages using exactly these methods. She built a small fire and cooked the meat on a flat stone. The smell made her mouth water, but she forced herself to wait. Eating raw meat in an alien jungle was asking for parasites. Heat killed most dangers. The meat tasted strange but good. Protein would keep her moving. 8T, the Academy monitoring station. Instructor Gorvin stood before a wall of screens showing cadet positions. Red dots marked those who had activated their beacons. There were 17 of them now, scattered across the training zone. The Virati failed at 0300, an assistant reported. Hypothermia. The Mithrani activated her beacon 20 minutes ago. Toxin exposure. Gorvin grunted. His stone eyes found a single green dot on the northern edge of the zone. The human. Status. Unknown. Noviakon activation. Last visual from orbital satellite showed her leaving a shelter site at dawn. She appears to be moving north toward the extraction point. Gorvin said nothing, but he continued to watch that green. Scylla woke in the medical bay with her head pounding and her stomach in knots. The fruit had looked safe. Purple skin, soft flesh, sweet smell. Her analytical mind had compared it to 17 similar fruits in the database and calculated an 83% probability of being edible. The jungle did not care about probability. The toxin had hit her within minutes. Hallucinations. Vomiting. Muscle spasms that left her unable to climb down from her tree. She had barely managed to press her beacon before losing consciousness. Now she lay in a clean bed with fluids dripping in her arm and shame burning in her chest. She had trusted data over caution. She had been wrong that a screen on the wall showed the remaining cadets. 23 still active out of 40. And there, on the northern edge, a single green dot moving slowly but steadily toward the extraction point. The human, Scylla watched that dot for a long time. Priya found a fruit around midday. A tree covered in purple spheres that smelled sweet and looked delicious. Her stomach growled at the sight. She did not eat. Instead, she cut a small piece and rubbed it against the inside of her wrist. Then she sat down and waited. 30 minutes passed. No dash, no warning, no squealing. Good sign, but not enough. She cut another piece and touched it to her tongue. Just a touch, no swallowing. She waited again. 5 minutes later, she felt a slight numbness spreading across her lips. Very slight. Easy to miss if you were not paying attention. She spat and rinsed her mouth with water from her canteen. Then she walked away from the tree without looking back. Her grandfather had taught her this too. Test everything. Trust nothing. The forest has been killing creatures for millions of years. It knows tricks you cannot imagine. The afternoon brought new challenges. The terrain grew steeper as she moved north. Ravines cut across her path, some shallow enough to climb, others deep enough to require long detours. The jungle grew thicker, blocking sunlight until she walked in permanent green shadow. She talked to herself as she walked. Quiet words, nothing important, just the sound of her own voice keeping her company. That bird has blue feathers. Pretty, probably poisonous. Everything colorful is poisonous. Remember the frogs in Brazil? Beautiful and deadly. She named the creatures she saw. The small ones that watched from branches became watchers. The insects that buzz around her head became buzzers. A large, slow-moving thing covered in moss became mossmen. It was a human habit. Naming things made them less frightening, less alien, more manageable. By late afternoon, she had covered 8 kilometers. Not fast, but steady. She found a game trail that headed roughly north and followed it, knowing that animals always found the easiest paths through difficult terrain. The trail led to water, as she had hoped. A small pool fed by a waterfall, surrounded by flat rocks, perfect for resting. She refilled her canteen and soaked her feet in the cool water. Her boots were holding up well. Her uniform was torn in several places, but still functional. The small cuts on her hands and arms from pushing through vegetation were healing clean. She was surviving, not thriving, not conquering, just surviving, taking each hour as it came, solving each problem as it appeared, moving forward one step at a time. The suns began their descent toward the horizon. Priya found another shelter site, this one beneath a rock overhang that would protect her from rain. She gathered materials for a fire and set 2 more snares near the game trail. As darkness fell, she sat at the mouth of her shelter and watched the jungle transform. Day creatures went silent. Night creatures began to sing. The air grew cold again, but this time she was ready. The fire caught faster tonight. Her hands remembered the motion. 23 green dots remained on the academy monitors. By morning, there would be fewer, but one that would keep moving north. Slow and steady. Patient and careful. Human. The sky changed color in a way Priya had never seen before. Green at the edges, black at the center, like a bruise spreading across the heavens. The birds stopped singing all at once. The insects went silent. Even the constant rustle of leaves in the wind died away. Priya stood at the edge of a clearing and felt the pressure drop. Her ears popped. The air smelled different. Charged. Electric. Storm coming. A bad one that she abandoned her northern path immediately. Survival first. Progress second. Her grandfather had taught her that the jungle did not reward stubbornness. She had perhaps an hour. Maybe less. The rocky outcrop she found was not perfect, but it would do. A natural overhang created by 2 massive boulders leaning against each other. The space beneath was tight, but dry. She crawled inside and began reinforcing the entrance with branches and debris. The first lightning strike hit 20 minutes later. Close enough to shake the ground. Close enough to leave the smell of burning ozone in the air. Then the rain came. Not rain like Priya knew from Earth. This was a waterfall from the sky. solid sheets of water that turned the air white and drowned out all other sound. Within seconds, she could not see beyond the entrance of her shelter. Flash floods tore through the ravines below. She heard trees falling, the crack and crash of wood giving way to impossible forces. The ground shook as something massive collapsed nearby. Priya wedged herself deeper into the overhang and wrapped her arms around her knees. She was not afraid. Fear was useless here. She was simply waiting to AT the academy. Alarms blared. Category 4 storm system, the weather officer announced. Centered directly over the training zone. Wind speeds exceeding 200 kilometers per hour. Sustained lightning activity. Instructor Gorvin watched the screens as red dots multiplied. Cadets activating beacons. Cadets giving up. The storm was forcing them out. Recommend immediate suspension of the exercise, the weather officer said. Cadet safety cannot be guaranteed in these conditions. No. The room went quiet. Gorvin pointed at a single green that near the storm center. The human is still active. If she can survive, the exercise continues. No one argued. No one dared. Drin sat up in his medical bed and watched the storm footage on the overhead screen. The orbital view showed a swirling mass of clouds that covered half the training zone. Lightning flashed in patterns that looked almost alive. That is where the human is, he said quietly. Scylla nodded from the next bed. Her color had returned, but she still looked weak. The probability of survival in those conditions is less than 12%. You said the fruit was safe. Scylla did not answer. They watched the storm together in silence. The eye passed over Priya's position around midnight. The rain stopped. The wind died. An eerie calm settled over the jungle. She crawled out of her shelter and looked up. Stars were visible through a perfect circle in the clouds. Beautiful and strange, she moved quickly. That would not last long. Water was everywhere. Clean water, fresh from the sky. She filled her canteen and drank deeply, then filled it again. She found a pool forming in a rock depression and washed the mud from her face and hands. Then she found the predator. The creature that had passed her shelter the first night lay dead beneath a fallen tree. The trunk had crushed its spine, killing it instantly. It was huge up close, nearly 4 meters long, covered in dark scales, with claws the length of her hand. Priya felt no triumph at its death. The jungle killed without malice and without mercy. Today the tree had fallen on the predator. Tomorrow it might fall on her, but the body was useful. She worked quickly, cutting strips of meat and wrapping them in leaves. She harvested sinew from the legs, strong cord that would serve better than bootlace thread. She took a single claw, long and curved and sharp as any knife. The wind began to pick up. The eye was moving on. She ran back to her shelter as the second half of the storm arrived. This half was worse. The wind screamed. The rain came sideways. Lightning struck so close that the flash and thunder were simultaneous. Priya pressed herself against the back of the overhang and covered her ears. She could do nothing now except endure. Hours passed. The storm raged. She did not sleep, could not sleep, but she rested as much as the conditions allowed. Dawn came gray and slow. The rain faded to a drizzle, then stopped entirely. The wind died down to a gentle breeze that rustled the battered leaves. Priya emerged from her shelter into a transformed world. Trees lay scattered like broken toys. The ground was carpeted with debris. Streams had become rivers. Rivers had become lakes. Landmarks she had memorized the day before were gone. She was still alive, still moving, still human. She checked her supplies. The meat was safe in its leaf wrapping. The sinew was secure around her wrist. The claw hung from a cord at her belt. She looked north. Somewhere beyond the devastation, the extraction point waited. Time to move. Water had moved the world while Priya slept. The river she had followed north was now 3 times its original size, brown and angry, carrying debris at dangerous speeds. The game trails she had used were underwater. The ravines had become swimming pools. She climbed the tallest tree she could find and looked for the suns. There, rising in the east. That meant north was to her left. The extraction point should be northwest of her position. 20 kilometers, she had estimated before the storm. But the flood had pushed her downstream during the night. She could see the changed landscape stretching in all directions, more like 30 kilometers now. Maybe more. She had roughly 30 hours left. Priya climbed down and began walking. Slow is smooth, she muttered to herself. Smooth is fast. She did not run. Running wasted energy and invited mistakes. Instead, she moved at a steady pace that she could maintain for hours. One foot in front of the other. One breath after another. The same rhythm her ancestors had used to chase prey across the African plains before they had fire, before they had tools, before they had anything except legs and lungs and patience. Humans were not the fastest creatures on Earth. They were not the strongest or the deadliest. But they could keep moving when other creatures had to stop. They could walk and jog for days if necessary, outlasting prey through sheer stubborn endurance, persistence hunting. The old ways. At the academy, Drin and Scylla had been released from the medical bay. They sat together in the observation room, watching the monitors that tracked remaining cadets. 0.8 green dots remained. 8 out of 40. One of those dots was the human, still moving, still heading north. She survived the storm, Scylla said. Her voice was quiet, confused. Yes. The probability of that was less than 12%. Drin turned to look at her. Perhaps your calculations were wrong. Scylla's compound eyes flickered in a pattern that suggested discomfort. Perhaps. On the main screen, Instructor Gorvin appeared in the corner, speaking to his assistants. His words were not audible, but his expression was clear. He was watching the human, with something that looked almost like respect. Priya encountered the predator around midday. It was not the same creature she had harvested after the storm. This one was alive, healthy, and hunting. She spotted its shape through the undergrowth before it spotted her. For legs, long body, scales that shifted color to match the vegetation. It was following her. Tracking her scent, she did not run. Running triggered chase instincts in predators. Instead, she stopped walking and turned to face it. The creature froze. Its eyes locked onto hers. Priya made herself as large as possible. Straightened her spine. Spread her arms. Lifted her chin. No, she said loudly. Not a scream, not a shout, just a firm, clear voice. Go away. Find something else. The predator tilted its head. This was not normal prey behavior. Normal prey ran or froze. Normal prey did not stand tall and make noise. Priya took a step forward. The predator took a step back. She took another step, maintaining eye contact, keeping her body language aggressive and confident. Go, she said again. I am not food. I am not worth the trouble. Long seconds passed. The predator's muscles tensed and relaxed, caught between hunger and confusion. Then it turned and disappeared into the jungle. Priya exhaled slowly. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was pounding. But she was alive. She kept walking north. The river crossing was the hardest part. The water was still high and moving fast, too fast to swim safely. But she found a fallen tree that stretched most of the way across, and she used the sinew from her belt to lash together a flotation bundle from hollow log sections. She walked across the tree as far as it went. When the tree ended, she gripped the flotation bundle and let the current take her. The water was cold and powerful, but she kicked steadily, aiming for the far bank. She made it. Barely. The current dragged her 100 meters downstream before she could pull herself onto solid ground. But she made it. The suns were setting by the time she found a suitable shelter site. A hollow in a hillside, partially covered by roots and vines. She crawled inside, ate the last of her predator meat, and built a small fire for warmth. Tomorrow was the last day. The extraction point was close now. 10 kilometers, maybe 15. She could make it. She looked up through a gap in the roots and saw stars appearing in the darkening sky. Different stars than Earth's, arranged in unfamiliar patterns. But they were still beautiful. She thought about her grandfather, about the village in the mountains where he had grown up, about the forests where he had taught her to survive. You come from a long line of survivors, he had told her once. Thousands of generations, millions of years. Every single one of her ancestors lived long enough to have children who lived long enough to have children. That is in your blood. That is what makes you human. Priya closed her eyes and let sleep take her. Tomorrow she would finish what she had started. Priya woke before dawn and packed her small camp with the same care she had shown every day. She buried the fire ashes. She checked her knife and canteen. She stretched muscles that ached from 3 days of constant use. Then she started walking. The jungle was different this morning. Quieter, calmer. The storm damage was still visible everywhere, but the plants were already recovering, already reaching toward the light. Life continued. She found a game trail heading northwest and followed it through increasingly open terrain. The dense canopy gave way to scattered trees and tall grass. The ground rose steadily toward a ridge line visible in the distance. The extraction point was on the other side of that ridge. She could feel the Academy monitoring station. Instructor Gorvin stood alone before the screens. The exercise deadline was noon. 3 green dots remained from the original 40. 2 were moving toward the extraction point from the east. 1 was approaching from the south. The human. She was going to make it. Gorvin had trained thousands of cadets from dozens of species over his long career. He knew when a candidate was going to fail and when they were going to succeed. The human was going to succeed. He turned to his assistant. Prepare a shuttle. I will collect this one personally. The extraction point was a clearing on top of the ridge, marked by a beacon tower that blinked steady green against the morning sky. Priya climbed the final slope and stepped into the open. She stood there for a moment, letting the sunlight warm her face. Then she walked to the tower and pressed her hand against the confirmation panel. A chime sounded. A light turned blue. Assessment complete. She sat down on a flat rock and waited. Her body felt hollow, empty of the tension that had kept her moving for 3 days. She was thin, dirty, covered in small wounds. Her uniform was torn in a dozen places. Her boots were caked with mud, but she was alive. She was here. The shuttle arrived 20 minutes later. It descended from the sky with a sound like controlled thunder and settled in the clearing with barely a bump. The door opened. Instructor Gorvin stepped out. Priya stood to meet him. She did not salute or speak. She simply waited. Gorvin studied her for a long moment. His stone face was unreadable. Then he asked a question that surprised her. How? She thought about the answer. About all the skills and knowledge and instincts that had kept her alive. About her grandfather and his village and the generations of survival wisdom passed down through her family. I did not try to beat the jungle, she said finally. I just tried to live in it. Gorvin made a sound that might have been approval. He stepped aside and gestured toward the shuttle. Gulme, you have earned your rest. The Academy medical bay was cool and clean and smelled like antiseptic. Priya submitted to the examination without complaint. Let them treat her cuts and check her vitals and give her fluids. Then she showered, ate a meal that tasted better than anything she had ever eaten, and slept for 14 hours straight. When she woke, Dren and Scylla were waiting outside her quarters. The confrontation was awkward at first. Dren stood stiffly, his scales flushed with colors she did not recognize. Scylla's compound eyes flickered in rapid patterns that suggested nervousness. We watch your progress, Dren said. On the monitors. Priya nodded and waited. I do not understand, Scylla said. Your species has no natural advantages. No clothes, no venom, no sermelvision. Your endurance metrics are below average. Your strength ratings are unremarkable. By every measure, you should have failed. And yet, Dren added quietly, you did not. Priya leaned against her doorframe and considered how to answer. These two had mocked her before the assessment. They had called her weak, primitive, fragile. Now they wanted to understand. Humans evolved as persistence hunters, she said. We cannot outrun prey, so we chase it until it collapses from exhaustion. We cannot overpower predators, so we learn their patterns and avoid them. We cannot survive extreme cold, so we make fire. We cannot survive extreme heat, so we find shade and water. She paused, choosing her words carefully. We are not strong because we have claws. We are strong because we learn to survive without them. Every problem has a solution. Every challenge can be overcome. You just have to keep moving forward one step at a time. Dren was silent for a long moment. Then he asked, the fire technique. The one you use to survive the cold. Can you teach me? Scylla's eyes flickered. And the testing method for unknown foods. The way you check for poison. I would like to understand the process. Priya felt something shift in her chest. Not pride exactly. Something warmer. Something like connection. Yes, she said. I can teach you. They walked to the mess hall together. The human and the Varadi and the Mithrani. Other cadets watched them pass. Whispers followed in their wake that a table in the corner. Instructor Gorvin observed the three of them with interest. He made a note in his personal file, one that would eventually become an official recommendation to Allied Command. Human survival instructors should be incorporated into all future training programs. Their methods are primitive but effective. Their knowledge has been tested across thousands of generations. They understand something that most advanced species have forgotten. He paused, considering his words. They understand that survival is not about power. It is about patience. It is about observation. It is about the willingness to keep going when everything says you should stop. He looked at the human one more time. Small, soft, fragile, alive. We have much to learn from him.